Welcome to the Global Journalism Seminars. This is the briefing. TikTok has become a global phenomenon with over 1 billion active users and a unique approach to short-form video content. While the app has faced scrutiny over data privacy, the Digital News Report found about half of all media organizations are turning to TikTok to reach younger audiences and engage with users in new ways. The Washington Post's TikTok account has gained over 1 million followers, with videos that cover news events in a fun and engaging way. But the future is not certain. Some US politicians have called for a ban on the app, citing national security concerns. In Norway, journalists at public service outlet NRK are not allowed to have the app on their phones. We polled 14 journalists from around the world to ask whether they use TikTok in their newsrooms. 31% said yes. Asked if they were more concerned about TikTok's data policies than other social media platforms, 69% said yes. Our guest today, Carmella Boykin, is part of the hugely popular Washington Post TikTok team, which includes Steve Jorgensen and Chris Vasquez. We'll look at some examples of how they've adapted news stories to reach a TikTok audience and ask what lessons they've learned on the app. That's the briefing. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Global Journalism Seminars. I'm Caitlin Mercer, and I'm thrilled to be hosting Carmella Boykin today as we delve into lessons from the Washington Post's epic TikTok experiment. Before joining Dave and his can of spam on the TikTok team, Carmella was at News 8 in Rochester, New York as an on-air and multimedia reporter, and she has a degree in broadcast and digital journalism from the Cy Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University, where she anchored the school's TV news station. Welcome, Carmella.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's great. We're big fans of your work, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to be pretty interactive in this webinar because that's the TikTok way. Unfortunately, I haven't worked out how to put a cake decorating video at the bottom of the screen, but we'll make do. We do have some of Carmella's videos, but just before we get to them, for the uninitiated, can I start, Carmella, by asking, what even is your job?
For sure.
What do you do?
My job is definitely, it's on like the newer realm of like in the journalism sphere. Basically, I'm a TikTok producer at the Washington Post. So my primary job is to make TikToks for the account and then also do any supplemental journalism I feel I want to experiment, or the Washington Post sees fit.
Yeah. So let's kind of go into an example of that. And bear with me. Here comes the Luddite. But we're going to go to an example. So that was a pretty viral effort, 3.1 million views.
Yeah, it does.
When you kind of interact with the Washington Post TikTok feed, all three of you seem to have very distinct styles. How would you describe your style on the platform, and how does it differ from the others?
I would say my style is very rooted in music and beats. I grew up dancing. I'm not a professional dancer by any means. That is not what I'm claiming, but I grew up dancing. And so I love editing to accents. I love adding different characters and facial expressions. And so I would say that pretty much encompasses my style. And then on the team, Dave and Chris also have their own style, but what's really cool is they all can kind of come together, especially when we're doing group TikToks. And so we can play off of each other, and we each bring in different elements, which I think makes for a well-rounded team.
Yeah. I think what separates you from other news outlets on the platform is a lot of news outlets seem to think they have a TikTok strategy, but that TikTok strategy seems to be taking their news clips and dumping them on TikTok. How do I phrase this nicely? Does that work? And why isn't it an approach that you've used? Why not just take the stuff you made for Reels and dump it on TikTok?
That's a great question. I think it can definitely be effective, right? Like when you're reposting the content you already have, it's already been run through a bunch of professionals who like edit the best bits and like put it together. And that can definitely create like viral moments. And it's definitely created success, especially within like the United States, like big broadcast organizations. But a benefit to what we're doing, a massive benefit to what we're doing is it's a lot of community building. So like when we want to ask our audience something or like ask them what they're interested in or just get a feel for what's going on, we can like make a TikTok and we have immediate response of people who are like really active and like care about us personally, or at least like our TikTok personas. And I think that's a strong benefit that the Washington Post has versus when you're just posting like content. Like that's awesome that you can make videos that get a lot of views, but like if you need something from an audience or you want information, they don't necessarily have access to that.
Yeah. What role would you say that humor plays in the work that you do?
I would say it plays a massive role. I think a lot of the times news is of course serious, and when it's appropriate, we definitely need to be serious. But when I'm watching content, like especially on TikTok, that's an entertainment platform, I want to be entertained. I want like some like light brought to the day. And like if a topic is going to be long and boring, like at least I put a joke in so I can pay attention to it long term.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like connecting people. Humor kind of like it makes things less intense. We have a running joke on our account where like we dance when it's scary. So like if it's a topic that's like particularly like terrifying, like I'm not going to make a joke out of it per se, but like if I have a little groove into it to like make people pay attention, I'll do it.
Yeah. I want to show an example of where you didn't go with the humor line, and I think it'll become abundantly clear.
The Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. Here's what this means. In 13 states, a trigger ban will take effect. They were designed to take effect as soon as Roe was overturned. In states without trigger laws like Alabama, Georgia, and Indiana, laws banning abortions will likely take effect in a few weeks. In states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, abortion access will largely depend on midterm elections. If anti-abortion Republicans win their races, they'll have a clear path towards banning abortion access. There are many states that have laws explicitly protecting abortion rights. In these states, abortion will likely remain accessible.
So where should I begin with this one? I want to ask, how quickly did that come out after the news came out? That little explainer.
I think, okay, so here's the background behind like this TikTok. I was on the West Coast. I was the only person on shift that day. Dave was in France and Chris was out. And so I had like woken up on West Coast time in California. And Roe had already been overturned. I woke up at like 7 a.m. So I needed just something to like tell the story, turn it quickly, because this is like an incredibly important story and something that fit the tone. And so I want to say this came out within like 4 or 5 hours of it being turned. And it performed really well. And I think this is a good example of just match that, like the most important part of our TikToks is telling the story. Do anything you can to get the story across. And in this case, especially in the US, when this is like such a serious topic and really important, people just wanted to know what was going on. And so that's what it said.
Tell me a little bit about the editorial process, typically speaking. How much of the job is reacting to breaking news and how much of it is planned out at a meeting in the morning?
So every morning our team basically, okay, so this is going to sound like an ad, but the Washington Post has a newsletter called The Seven. My fantastic colleagues work on it. And it's amazing because when we wake up, like we can just look at, okay, what does the Washington Post reporting have going on? What are the most important stories?
Yeah.
And it's already distilled into like a couple of different bullet points. So it's really useful for us. So we'll come to the meeting with ideas of either looking at the Seven or looking at the homepage and figuring out what's going on. Of course, just like in any other area of journalism, there's evergreen stories that we can kind of plan out ahead of time. But if there's breaking news, that's usually one of our top priorities because like, even though we're dancing, like our like tagline on TikTok is we're a newspaper. And so the goal is to inform people about like what the top stories are, what's going on.
Yeah. There's a question about that later, but I'll wait before we come to that.
Okay, I didn't mean to jump ahead.
I want to know, are there beats that it's like, okay, this is Chris's don't touch, this is Carmella's don't touch, this is Dave's don't touch, or do you just decide on the go?
I think we for the most part we decide on the go. What's really nice is our team has good communication, so we can kind of like work out who's feeling the story. Like if someone wants a story, but another person has an idea, like of course the person who has the idea can run with it. Sometimes like we'll have like different parts of our team will have topics that we cover more. So like right now, Dave's been doing a lot of covering the mass shootings because he created a really, honestly, like an excellent format of telling what's going on. And just showing like how many mass shootings are happening in the US and just like having a duet of like every other video he's done along with the newest one. But if we wanted to jump in, we totally could, but we also have a kind of respect of like, these are things that other people on our team have created too. So
let me see if I can very quickly show an example of that format, because it is quite powerful. Okay, here we go. Boom and boom. I'm not going to turn the sound on for this one, but essentially, how would you explain this to somebody who's not a TikTok user? What is Dave doing?
Yeah, so on TikTok, there's a feature called Duet where you can take an old video and add your new video on top of it. And so that's what he's using in this feature. So it's already using like an in-app feature that people know. And the video is honestly just silent. All you hear is the papers turning, so you're not even missing any audio. And it just kind of shows the magnitude of like, this is the same thing. Every time there's a mass shooting, like
sorry, just an example of that.
It's just the same thing over and over, which is crazy. And then also like as a TikTok team, how do you cover that? Because we've covered it in all sorts of different ways of sitting at a desk and talking straight to camera or like showing visuals, like with the Uvalde shooting in Texas. As a journalist, it's just crazy because there are a bunch of kids and like, how do you cover that in a way that's applicable to the audience that will make sense? Yeah. That's still engaging, but shows also like what's going on. So this format does it really well.
Respectful, but informative at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. How do you separate your personal life from this job? Because it must bleed into out of hours. How do you have any rules for yourself, or does the team have agreed rules of like when you don't open TikTok? Do you have it on a personal phone apart from the work phone? What's your strategy?
If I were smart, I would say yes, it's completely separate, it's completely healthy, but that's not the case. And I feel like if you ask any social media person, they're like, it's like my life is on social media. 24/7. What is nice, exactly. What is nice about the post is whenever we have comments or like a TikTok that is getting particularly negative comments, we can say, I don't want to look at that. Can someone else look at the comments? If there's constructive feedback, let me know. But other than that, like, I don't want to know what's happening. And that's really helpful. But in terms of like separating personal life and like TikTok is, I have 2 phones and it's on both phones. And I'm constantly checking to figure out, okay, what are the new trends? What are new music that can happen? Or what's new music that I can use? So it's definitely intertwined, but I do try like on the weekends. I guess what's nice about this job is it's made TikTok not fun. Like TikTok is not like an app for pleasure that I use for the most part. So on the weekends, I just don't even look. But during the week, like your girl is scrolling.
And tell me about the comment section that you mentioned. Is it the 3 of you dealing with the comment section, or is there an additional part to the team?
Yeah, for the most part, it's the 3 of us like managing the account. We also do have an excellent person who's on the team who sometimes you see. Her name's Anna, Anna Lisroy, and she posts our YouTube shorts for us. She helps us shoot sometimes. She's excellent, and she helps as well. But for the most part, it's the 3 of us and our managers.
So you've mentioned something really important there. The YouTube shorts. This is a new development. Tell us a little bit about who, what, where, and why. Your TikToks are now available on YouTube.
They are. They're available on YouTube Shorts. It's Washington Post YouTube Shorts if you want to subscribe. Basically this came about because when TikTok started to get shaky and there were rumblings about, oh, is TikTok going to get banned? Like, what's going to happen? One thing I've always been like adamant about is like diversifying where you post your content is really important, because if one platform collapses, it's really important to like that we have a brand elsewhere. So this is something that I kind of pitched and was like, hey, can we start posting on other verticals? Because if other things are popping up, it's great to not only like expand our audience, everyone isn't on TikTok, like how can we reach more people? And it got greenlit. The Washington Post already had like an account. Our team already had an account we can use and just kind of like revamp. And it took a minute. At first it was like, is this even worth anything? But we started like posting more and more. And now we have over 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. So it's been growing really well.
Well, you've queued up. Oh no, I have not downloaded the video of you guys talking about. Maybe I have. Hang on a second. Let's see. Is this the TikTok ban video? I got coding inside my DNA. Coding for the beast, got for rampage inside my DNA. I got power, poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA. I got hustle, the ambition, flow inside my DNA. I was born like this, immaculate conception. I transform like this, perform like this. Wish out you wasn't open. I don't contemplate, I meditate. Get off your head. This that puts against the bed. This that. I love that one. Yeah, it must be unnerving for you guys as a team to watch this story unfolding.
I mean, I don't necessarily feel unnerved, but it's just another example of like, oh, like things are going to change as they've always changed and will continue to change. Like change is inevitable, but it's always can be like uncomfortable for sure. I think if TikTok does end up getting banned, like in the US, it'll be unfortunate because we have like a really nice community on TikTok. But again, it's like, that's why we're adapting and like moving forward. And so we'll continue to push on. We'll continue to make vertical content. Like we're not going to stop. And it's kind of similar to what happened with Vine, where there's like a bunch of people had a massive community, then it went away. People went to YouTube and some people made it and some people didn't, but we're going to put our best effort in for sure.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you another question about this. Let me just scroll down here to say, what is the, oh yeah, do we know what the latest news is on the proposed ban?
That is a great question. I don't have a prepared answer, so I don't know. But I recommend you go to Washington Post for any reporting. We are covering it.
For all of your news needs.
Exactly.
Other titles are available. Okay.
Hey, you can say Carmella sent you.
Yeah. Do we get a discount code?
I'll hook you up. I'll let you know.
Okay, so it's a wait and see thing. The contingency plan, is there anything beyond the YouTube shorts and diversifying the where you post your content? Is there anything else that you've prepared?
There's not anything officially in the works, but I think as like new verticals continue to pop up, we'll like continue to expand there, because it's of course like in a big company, it's like a pitching process and you have to go through a bunch of layers to make sure it gets approved and everything. So right now we're focusing on YouTube shorts, but there could be other things on the way.
Yeah. How many subscribers are on your YouTube channel now?
We have 50,000 subscribers.
50,000.
Yeah. And that's in the past couple of months. Like that's very recent.
It's like 2 months, right?
Yes.
Wow. That's pretty good. Pretty good. How much crossover do you think there is between TikTok followers and YouTube followers?
I think there's a good amount of crossover. We have had people say, like, oh, I can't believe you guys are here. Like, I see you guys on TikTok all the time. But there are also people who post on YouTube who are like, yo, we haven't been on TikTok. So thank you for posting on YouTube.
Okay. That's interesting. Tell me about, kind of surprised to hear that you've got TikTok on your work phone and on your personal phone. It's not, I guess it's not as risky, given that you're not making news and dealing with sources in so much as interpreting news and making it available. Is that fair to say? But just as we saw in the briefing video, NRK has banned reporters from keeping it on their phones because they see it as a security risk. Is there anything in place for other Washington Post reporters that says, don't host this?
Not to my knowledge, to be really honest. I think I can't say for certain, so don't necessarily quote me on this. But yeah, I don't think so. But I think, of course, like government regulations are different than like organizations.
Yeah.
So it's definitely like following whatever.
Have you ever had a conversation with an investigative reporter, for example, who said, oh no, I don't have that on my phone? Or
I have spoken to a few people who are like, I'm wary about this. Like, I don't feel comfortable having this. I don't feel comfortable like with them having my information, with it being on my personal phone or my work phone, or them tracking my location or whatever. And I think that's totally valid. Like, I think at the end of the day, like you have to do what works for you and what your values are and what fits like your belief system. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can't speak to that at all. But
yeah, I was kind of surprised when we polled the fellows, our journalist fellows who are mid-career journalists from around the world, that 69% of them said they were more concerned about TikTok and its data and privacy policies than other social media platforms. Do you have any kind of reaction to why people might be more fearful of TikTok than other platforms with potentially similar data policies?
I would say, again, like I'm not super privy to like what's going on behind the scenes and like any government decisions or like how intensely TikTok like is and everything. I would say people always have people are always wary about new things, of course.
Yeah.
And then potentially like who owns TikTok, but again, that's like far beyond. Fortunately, like that's beyond what my realm is.
Your remit. Yeah. Look,
exactly. So day to day, I'm focused on
you
content.
here to give like an in-depth commentary on data privacy laws. We invited you here because you're a great creator and a great interpreter of news for different audiences. So let's go to another example. Here we go. I'm getting good at this, Sharon. Here goes. Is she loading?
Is Russia going to deploy nuclear weapons? What? Deploy means move. Oh, let me look. Okay, on Saturday, Russia announced they were going to store tactical weapons in Belarus. Where? A country that shares a long border with northern Ukraine. Right. Then the US and European allies told Putin it was dangerous rhetoric. NATO said the moves were irresponsible, they were monitoring the situation, but see no reason to change their strategy. US officials said there wasn't any indication that Putin actually moved nuclear weapons around. And Russia responded that Western sanctions won't stop them from moving nuclear weapons to Belarus. Questions? Did you just duck and cover?
Let's do some tech questions based on
Hit me
that.
up.
So tell us a little bit, what equipment do you have at home? What equipment do you have in the office?
Well, first, welcome to my home. This is my home living room studio. Basically at home, I have this green screen. Almost all of our content is shot on iPhone. So I shoot on an iPhone in 4K.
Yeah.
Hashtag not sponsored. And I also have like a pancake light that I use that like keeps me nice and illuminated.
Great.
And for the most part, that's it. It's not anything super complex. Oh, and we also use mics. So I love good audio. So like that's why I have this mic. And we use lav mics for any audio that we need our hands. But it's pretty simple. It's not anything super complex. And then a lot of like the big dramatic things that you see are just created in like Photoshop and Premiere.
Do you use a tripod? The phone is on a tripod? Or?
Oh yes, yeah, it's on a tripod.
Yeah.
So it's on a tripod with like an iPhone holder. So
great. Yeah. We've discussed the sound equipment. Tell me a little bit more about the lapel mic that you use.
So it's really just a standard like lav mic. But it's an iPhone lav mic. So it's one of the ones where it's like, oh, you plug it into a phone. And those work really well. I know Dave and Chris use like traditional like Sennheiser microphones that plug into like a Zoom recorder. So it's a little more like fancy and high tech. I also just got, I'll just show you on here. Okay. I also just got like these like little, it's like a DJI mic and they're like really tiny and small. And you can also plug in like one of like the iPhone mics into that, and that works
Yeah.
really well too. So
Great.
for me, it's all about like portability and making sure I can like take all my stuff and run. Because if I'm in California or if I'm in a different state, I need to just be able to like shoot stuff wherever.
Yeah. And then I'm going to ask the stupid questions because that's what I'm here for. Do you record directly into TikTok or do you record onto the phone and edit somewhere else?
So we record everything into, well, that's a great question because that depends. Almost all of our content I record into the camera app, but some of it, like for the duets that Dave does, he'll record those in the app. Or like if we're
Right.
using a special feature that's viral on TikTok, we'll record those in the app so we can use it. But almost everything else is recorded into photos and then we'll transfer it to a computer. We edit it in Premiere Pro and then we export it. A big thing, if you want to export your content, is exporting it in 1080p. So that way TikTok doesn't like compress your content and make it all like grainy and ugly. So even though we shoot in 4K, we export in 1080p if we want to get technical.
Good to know. That's one of the top 5 takeaways from today. Export in 1080p, people. And then when it comes to uploading the content, do you have the Washington Post copy editors checking your captions, or you do?
Yes. So, well, we have our managers who act as our copy editors. So basically, what's nice is all of our content is pulled from like Washington Post reporting. It's already went through like series and series of editors.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, before we post, we send it off to our managers to check to make sure, you know, the text is right and it's accurate and there isn't any spelling and like the descriptions and the captions are all accurate. So
how many videos do you have in draft at any one time?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say I don't necessarily have a bunch drafted, but I have like parts and pieces. So I have like, oh, I would love to use this sound. If a story comes up and like characters fit this sound, I will be using it. Or I'll have like music that's drafted, or I'll have like, oh, this story is really important. It's evergreen, but I just need like a way to make it interesting to an audience. So.
And when there's 3 of you and 1 account, does TikTok have a backend that enables you to log in as different users on that 1 account so you can see who's doing what?
Well, we're all just logged into like the Washington Post account. But yeah, multiple people can be logged in. Thank goodness, because that would be a pain. You
can see who did what, or no?
No, but we communicate like offline of like, can I comment this?
Yeah.
Can I comment this back to this person? Can I post this? So.
Are you on Slack doing that kind of comms or? Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So sometimes if we get like a particularly snarky comment or we get like a comment we want to make a joke back to, I'll Slack Dave and be like, hey, is it cool if I comment this? And usually it's yeah. So
great. Okay, that's enough of me monopolizing you. Let's welcome everyone else into this conversation. I'm going to go downstairs. I'm actually going to start with Yossi. I mentioned earlier that we would come back to the "we are a newspaper" question. And I wonder if our team is... There they are. Hi, Yossi, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for talking with us today. I had a question about the aesthetics or style of content when a journalistic publication is present on TikTok. I guess one approach that Caitlin also kind of like referred to earlier would be this more traditional, looking like journalism in a very recognizable and maybe classical way, and maybe even describing your reporting to differentiate from...
Hang on, Yossi, give us 1 second. It's Tarye's first day with the remote, and it's very difficult with that remote. So let's just give him a second to get you in the frame, and then let's start again because it's not so easy. There you are.
Yes. Hi. Okay. I don't know. Were you able to hear what I was saying, or should I just start from the...
Start from the beginning.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm interested in the aesthetics or style of content when a journalistic publication is on TikTok. So I guess one approach would be this looking like journalism, more traditional, more recognizable as we are as a legacy media here among you on TikTok, and maybe even describing your reporting to differentiate yourself from other content creators that are present on TikTok and who adhere to very different kinds of principles than journalists do. And the other option could be, the line of thinking that it's more important to play by the rules of the platform, which in TikTok's case is probably entertainment, being funny. I guess this is the part that the Washington Post has chosen. And then, of course, the you then play down the more traditional or classical aesthetics or visuals of journalism. So do you have a thought about which one is better, or do you see this more traditional way possibly working on TikTok for an organization like Washington Post?
I think honestly the answer is a hybrid between the two. I think the most effective thing for brands like big news organizations and even individuals is to be, and this is going to sound corny, but be like the most authentic and what's the most natural for you. So like for us, like I'm naturally like a light person. What Caitlin said in my intro was I was a local journalist in Rochester, New York, and that was a really serious job. My job was to stand up there and just have, a serious face and be like really intense because I was talking about serious topics and that's what fit. But that's not like what fit my personality. Whereas this job, I get to be a little bit more myself, and I think that translates really well to an audience and it leads to more success. I think also on TikTok, a lot of audiences are really kind of privy to like when they're being performed to versus when they're being like told a story authentically. So there are a lot of journalists on TikTok that feel like they're just like telling you a story and like you're there with them and like you're kind of an equal. And I found even when we do content that's more of that like serious broadcast style or like sitting at the desk or things like that, they don't necessarily connect as well because people don't feel connected. So for us, like leaning into my personality and being a little bit more light is authentic to me and also plays well on the platform. But for people who are more serious, like you can do serious news and still not necessarily be behind a desk, if that makes sense. There's still ways to do it that connect to an audience that aren't super traditional.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Well, yeah, you kind of did, but I'm still interested in hearing your thoughts about whether a news organization can differentiate itself from other types of content creators when they are on social media, especially maybe on TikTok, by being more maybe transparent about them doing journalism there.
Yossi, is it fair to say the question is, can news itself be your differentiating factor on a social platform?
News and, I guess, journalistic principles.
Journalistic principles, okay.
Absolutely. And we've done that as well. We've talked about, especially when the war in Ukraine was first starting and people wanted to know like where was that information even coming from? Like, are we making it up? Because a lot of people had questions like about what was going on and going through. And because we're a massive organization, we can explain, okay, so here are reporters that we have that we're getting information from. Here's where they're getting their videos from. And like, here's a shot of them taking the video that you saw, explaining how we got the information, how we were cross-checking information. Because at any major news organization, they're fact checkers behind the scenes, like verifying where video is coming from. And being able to show that process really like gained a sense of trust with the audience. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely a unique area that organizations have and that are really valuable to use.
I want to stay on this point for a second because Andrew Purcell has a question in the Q&A saying, what is the ethical process you go through when you put the ideas together? Is there, do you discuss ethical problems, or is there a legal team or an ethics team that you kick problematic content up to?
A lot of the time, again, because our content is already vetted by reporters and then editors and then a series of processes to get published. We fortunately don't have to deal with that a ton because the content we're using had already been previously published, like on the Washington Post. But yeah, we talk about ethics and what are proper and appropriate ways to cover things. Like, again, going back to the mass shootings, how do we cover this in a way that's ethical and sensitive to families and people who are being affected, but also giving the information properly? So whenever we have questions, that's why we have managers. We're able to send it to them and say, hey, and if they don't have an answer, they'll kick it to their manager. So sometimes it'll go up the train of like a manager to a manager to a manager to get cleared. But that's, again, a massive benefit of being part of a large organization.
Such a big team, yeah. Is there an example of that you feel comfortable sharing?
Not necessarily, because I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah,
there have been a couple, but I will say there have been a couple of examples, especially like recently, where it's like, okay, we want to cover this topic, but the Post is still working on it's ethics on how to figure out how to cover those topics appropriately for an audience, that basically just so it's clear, so the audience understand what's going on. And we're transparent in what we're doing. So
yeah. Alex from Newsweek has an excellent question here. It's a two-parter. How familiar are you with UTM codes and the death of UTM codes and how that might affect your work? Is that a question for someone upstairs?
most definitely. But now that you said that, I'm going to look it up because I don't know what a UTM
Same.
code is. I'm sure it affects my daily life and I don't even know it. So,
But more importantly, what does success mean to your team? How are you gold? What are the metrics? Like, how do you know that you're being successful?
So the most obvious one is, of course, what everyone can see is looking at views, right? You can look and see this is how many people that we're reaching. But a massive way to tell that we're being successful, especially on a platform where content can be suppressed and like you don't even know it necessarily, is looking at the comments. When we look at comments and people say, wow, this really explained a topic that I didn't understand, or can you guys elaborate? Can you guys post a little bit more content on this? I want to know more about it. Or I really like this content, or I really learned from it, or I didn't understand this at all. Could you clarify it again? Those are really great ways of telling what kind of job we're doing. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to inform people about the world around them through Washington Post reporting. And so we know we're doing a job effectively when the comments are like, yo, I didn't understand what was happening in this element about the war in Ukraine, or I didn't understand that like this is where you're pulling the videos from, or this is how you're telling that this video from the war in Ukraine is fake. Was altered by whatever editing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If you were talking to a freelance reporter, for example, Peter Young, who's put a question in for you, he's just started making videos about the work that he does. What advice would you give them? How important is it for freelance journalists and journalists in general to be making versions of their content or behind the scenes of their content? How do you think it's part of being a journalist now, short form vertical?
I think that's a great question. And it kind of depends on what your goals are. But I would say if you want to create an audience, or you want people to know who you are and you want to have an audience that trusts you, especially as a freelancer, then Peter, I would say, yeah, that would be a great thing to do. And it doesn't have to be every day. Maybe if like once a week, you're just pulling some content and explaining how your process goes. That could be really valuable because a lot of people don't even know how journalism is put together. Like for you, you'll of course know, like, this is my day today. Like I wake up and I do this and da-da-da, and it's really easy. And I just import and export. And like, this is how I pitch because I'm a freelancer. And that's just your life. But a lot of people don't even know that. So you could definitely find an area of people who are interested in that. And also you're a storyteller. Like if that's your gig, if that's your thing, you already know how to put together a story. So it's just figuring out how to tell it in a different way on a short form platform.
Yeah. We've got a question from Ashley Fraser about the frustration of being with business verification, not being able to access certain sounds, and how do you get around that?
So this is definitely a problem. It's a problem that we have because we're a business account. What I do is I have a bunch of different burner accounts and I only like certain content on those burner accounts. So one of my favorite accounts that I have is a DJ account because for whatever reason, and I hope this doesn't change because I'm saying this, but I follow DJs and when they mix music, like we're allowed to use it because it's not like copyrighted. So a sound that's sped up or like the sound that you heard was Kendrick Lamar's DNA, but someone put like just a jazzy beat behind it, right? So we could use that because it was a mix. So I would encourage you to use mixes.
Remixes. Okay. I feel like it's 1995 again. Okay. I want to just bring into this conversation, one of our journalist fellows is Bridget Brennan from Australian Broadcast Corporation in Australia. And Bridget's working on a project about Indigenous, hi Bridget, about both how Indigenous affairs are covered and how the people who cover them are treated in newsrooms. And Bridget, I think we've had conversations about Indigenous content on TikTok. And I wanted to ask you, do you feel like it needs to be part of an Indigenous affairs beat? And do you feel, let me rephrase this. Do you feel like TikTok has given us new ways to reach marginalized communities?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Carmella. That was so interesting. Would love to talk to you for 3 hours about what you do. I think so cutting edge. But yes, we were finding that we were starting to notice that because Indigenous people in Australia are a very young group of people, so the majority of our population are under the age of about 25. And so there was starting to be like a lot of conversations or debates even on Twitter about Indigenous affairs, TikTok, that were sort of on Twitter maybe about like sort of 7 to 8 years ago, and then we're finding like a much younger audience were having really cutting edge, interesting conversations on TikTok that we felt we were missing. And so it has become a place that we've started to have a look like, what are people saying on TikTok? What's trending in terms of debate and conversations about, particularly about Indigenous rights, land use, debates about politics in Australia. So yeah, certainly we felt like it was really important for our work to have a look and a really important platform for marginalised communities. But what I would say is we were really slow. I think, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that out loud, but I think we were quite slow as an organisation to tapping into that and even like starting to produce content specifically for that audience. So yeah, we'd love to get your thoughts on that as well, Carmella.
Yeah, I would say it's a big like consumer behavior question, I think. And if young Indigenous people are in that area, then I definitely think it would be valuable to make content where they already are. Just like for our team, we're making content primarily. The idea is to get younger people interested and aware of what the Washington Post even is. And so that's a big part of our job. And so if that fits the demographic that you're trying to reach, I would definitely say meet them where they are and try and make content in similar formats that they are. Because a lot of the time I feel like, especially in journalism sometimes, and I say this because I've done this, is where it's like, like all of these important elements that you want to talk about, or you have access to all of these resources. And sometimes you'll put content in a way that's like makes sense in your world, but not necessarily like in the world that you're trying to reach. So figuring out ways that you can pull those elements of the world that you're trying to reach into the content that you're making can help you reach that audience. Did that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Totally, thanks.
I'm going to ask you a question from Yesenia Marquez, but I'm going to ask it cautiously. But I think there's something important here. Yesenia says, how do you master the algorithm? And I think the honest answer is we don't know, because we don't know what the algorithm is. But there might be some tips that you have, things that you've learned that you would share with other journalists trying to reach an audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one, especially when I was starting out, I was like, I'm going to master it. Like, I'm going to figure out what to do. Like, how do you do this? And the reality is TikTok is a business at the end of the day. And an individual or like a group of people outside of the organization aren't going to be able to predict like what's going on internally. Like, it's just not possible. But a couple of things have worked consistently. So making sure that our visuals are quick, that we're changing them every 2 seconds or so, making sure that we're telling an engaging story. Because at the end of the day, like, story is what does the best on TikTok. So when you see like the girlies in their car and they have the microphone and they're just like, hi, I'm here to tell you about like my day, like as a da-da-da, and you'll never believe what happened. It works because they're really good storytellers. And then changing visuals, adding music, anything that's potentially trending, also help as well. But then also occasionally avoiding like big trigger words. So the TikTok I posted yesterday had the word pandemic and abortion. And both of those words can potentially get our content suppressed. So in abortion, I made the I an exclamation point, and in pandemic, I made the I an exclamation point, because sometimes that'll help. A lot of the time when we're covering gun violence, like even typing out the word gun violence or saying gun violence, TikTok will recognize that word or any potential like word that they don't want on the platform. So a workaround is to change the spelling of it. There are certain like known spellings on TikTok of how to alternate how things are spelled, which can be challenging and a little frustrating as a journalist when you're just trying to get the information across. But it's figuring out little tweaks like that help.
I think we have to, now that you've said the word suppressed, just touch on the suppression experiment where you actively tried to get suppressed.
When I failed miserably.
Okay, I'm glad you said it. What did you learn from that experiment? Or
honestly,
maybe in case people don't know about that, what you attempted, do you want to give a rundown of what you attempted and maybe why it didn't work and what you learned from it?
For sure. So Dave's idea was, whenever we say certain like content on the whenever we say like certain things in the platform, they tend to get suppressed. So when we're talking about the war in Ukraine, saying war tends to get suppressed, or saying Ukraine sometimes gets suppressed, or literally any word that you could think of that could potentially be problematic or need some sort of trigger warning might get suppressed. So what would happen if we made a TikTok that one had all of those words in it and one had none of the words in it? And so we made the one that had all of the words in it, and it performed better than the TikTok that didn't have any of the words in it. Both of them have like over 1 million views. And basically what we learned is, one, we can't predict what's going on. Two, we may or may not have some ideas of maybe our TikTok got a little heated. Maybe something behind the scenes was getting those TikToks more views. But at the end of the day, it was just, we're just going to continue making content, because if this is what happened in our experiment, like, we just need to keep going forward, because our goal is journalism, and like, this is a fault of the platform. This isn't us necessarily. So it can be challenging and frustrating, but part of the process.
Yeah. But I think the bottom line is, you don't know for sure ever if it is that you used a bad word and you're being suppressed, or you just made a video that didn't work. Like, there's no real way to tell, is there?
There are some tells on the platform, like sometimes when you look at where your content was being viewed. So if our content we find is only being viewed on the following page versus the For You page, then it's like, okay, so that might be a little suspicious, because it's suspicious.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's not the case, and sometimes it really is just the content and the story didn't land. So yeah, like you said, you can't predict it.
I think my only lesson in social media is that if somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to charge you a certain amount of money because I know how to make the algorithm work for you, and they don't work at TikTok or at Facebook or at LinkedIn or wherever, they're lying, because you just don't. That algorithm changes every single day. So that's my lesson for the day. A question for you from Felix at Süddeutsche Zeitung. When you cross post to shorts, are you tailoring that content for shorts, or is it just a straight cross post?
We tailor it slightly. So when you post on TikTok, it adds a watermark into the content, that little TikTok watermark, and other platforms hate that. So there are a couple of different downloaders you can use where you can copy the link from your TikTok, put it into the downloader, and download it without the watermark, which is like pretty simple. So that's what we do. And then that way, any graphics that we add in TikTok, because so many of the graphics we add in like the TikTok editor, those little colored boxes are all in TikTok. So that way, when we download it, we still have that text, and then we cross post it. So we post it without the watermark, and then we retitle it. Sometimes we'll title it something different than what was on TikTok. That way, like it matches the platform a little bit better. But other than that, it's a direct cross post in terms of content. We're not changing anything.
Do you remember off the top of your head some of the websites where you can download without the watermark?
Generally, I think if you Google it, if you say download TikTok without watermark, I want to say, I don't even want to say it. I don't really know.
No,
if you
totally
Google it, you'll find a whole list.
Google it, guys.
Yeah. Very simple to find. It's not like you don't have to do anything crazy.
Clementine from Pink News and a lot of other people have asked about monetization And I think there's a lot of pressure when you come to your boss and say, hey, we need to start a TikTok account because we need to reach these younger audiences or whatever. The big pressure is like, okay, but how do we monetize it? What lessons have you learned with regard to monetizing on TikTok? Are there any formats that you use that are monetizable? And my follow-up question would be, I know that you're monetizing the YouTube channel. Is who's giving better bang for buck?
So the way my job works, like within the corporate structure, within like the Washington Post, like I'm not necessarily dealing with like the ins and outs of like how much money is being pushed around. But I can say that like when you on our account, when you see an ad, that means that like a company is investing in our team because they want the visibility that they get from our team. So we just posted an ad on Sunday from Netflix that they paid to have on our account. So that's one way that we're getting money through TikTok. Cool. Now, it's important, I think, as a brand to be cautious with that, because if you just start posting straight ads, well, now why are people going to follow you? So we post our ads on Sundays because we're not typically posting content on that day anyway. So that way it's our designated ad day. But very important, I think, for brands to be cautious. And then also, then on YouTube, we can just like monetize like within internally because YouTube has like a monetization system. So I would say the plan is like we have financial people that are running everything behind the scenes, and that's not in my realm, but you know, tread lightly. But I think it's also important to, even if it's not getting monetized, it's still creating brand awareness, because a lot of people didn't even know, a lot of young people didn't know what the Washington Post was before Dave started the TikTok account. And now they do. And now they know that what kind of coverage we have. So
and those are two very different, I mean, one, you can see the return on investment from the paid partnerships and the yada yadas. But this kind of building brand and trust and with a new demographic, you can't really put an ROI on that, but it's working for you guys. What do the metrics look like for your audience, in terms of demographics?
Yeah, so we're right in the sweet spot of like, I believe we did a survey on this, and I believe it's like 18 to 32 is like our prime demographic. But it's primarily a young audience. It's like Gen Z and millennials, which is like not right in that like sweet spot of people who are aging into purchasing content, right? Because like graduating college, and so now you're in the real world and you need to know what's going on in the world, and like starting a family. And so that like key demographic of like growing in the business landscape is really valuable.
There are so many questions for you, Carmella, and we're running out of time, and I'm not sure how to prioritize these. So I'm just going to do luck of the scrolly wheel here, guys. Forgive me. I think we can maybe fit in 3 or 4 more questions. I saw somebody from the Yorkshire Post, and I really wanted to read their question. Where have you gone? Lancaster Farming says, Stephanie, she asked how to get around the semi-lame commercial sounds. So we've got the look for DJ remixes. Any other tips?
And sped up. Yes. If you search like X sound sped up, you'll likely find sped up versions that you can use.
X sound sped.
And I'm saying this because there are other big like accounts that do this as well. So like in the US, like E-News, like Entertainment News, they do this as well. Like you'll see it with a lot of the big magazines. So we're not alone in this.
When nobody come for us. And Ahmed says, how do you strike? We've kind of covered this, but let's talk about it a little bit more. How do you strike the balance between the personality and brand that you've built on TikTok, which is fun and friendly, and you just want to be friends with you guys, versus the personality of the Washington Post, which is Watergate, serious, professional? Do you have lines in place that you know not to cross? Do you have any kind of policy?
Because it's so new, we don't have like an official policy, but I would say again, it falls into like journalistic integrity, like basic skills that like every journalist should have. And so one of them for me is, if I were affected by this story, how would I want to receive it? How would I want to see it on the receiving end? If I saw this TikTok and I was like an impacted party, how is that going to make me feel? Right? How would that make my family feel? And so I try and really implement that. So even though like I'm dancing in a lot of stories, I try and maintain that balance. And I think that's really important when you're covering stuff on TikTok. And because then that lends into the goals of the Washington Post, which is, again, to inform your audience about the world around them, or about whatever your beat or whatever the demographic of your paper or your news organization is just good journalism. So
do you think every news outlet should have a TikTok team or a short form vertical team?
I think every news organization should think about, how are we going to continue to reach people, especially as they continue to go more on these vertical platforms? Because are they watching TV all the time? Like, not necessarily. Like, what is people's actual behavior? And let's bring our content to them so we can continue furthering our goals.
I've got a question from Hideki in Japan. Do you ever feel like your appearance on TikTok puts you at risk?
Knock on wood, I hope not. I felt this more working in local journalism, because I graduated, this is going to date me, but I graduated from university in 2021. And I was really scared as a local journalist. Like, is someone going to come like up to me on the street and say whatever nasty things and like attack me? Right. So I drive the most boring car like that everyone has. Like, I drive, like, do all these things to like make sure I look neutral. Fortunately, because of my job and the nature of my job, I'm taking content that other massively, just incredibly brave journalists are on the front lines doing and translating it. But it's always in the back of my mind for sure, because as a journalist, like, it's always a risk, which is a little scary. But if it's in service of, like, again, informing people about the world around them, I think it's worth it. And again, to clarify, like, the content that we're producing, I'm largely dancing in my home. Like, but there are just so many fantastic journalists at the Washington Post who are in Ukraine and in all of these like dangerous places that are doing just such valuable work. And I can't thank them enough. So
I want to go to Phil from Brazil, and see if this camera can make it to Phil. Yeah, no. It's hard, Tarye. You have all my sympathy. But that is 1, 2, 3. Button number 4 should get you to Phil.
Should it?
There you go.
Hi, Carmella. How are you? Thank you
well.
first. I'm curious about one thing. Washington Post username in TikTok is, of course, Washington Post. But the nickname, which appears in every video, is "We Are a Newspaper." So maybe the ones who are watching it, they are not aware that's Washington Post content. Why is that?
So the lore of the Washington Post TikTok account is, when Dave started the account, people weren't sure if Dave's name was Washington and he was posting, or if the Washington Post like was in Washington State. And so people didn't like know what was going on. So they truly didn't understand like what the Washington Post was. So it was as a response to that, Dave put in like the description, "We are a newspaper." Like, so there weren't any questions. Like, the Washington Post is a newspaper. If they have further questions, they can watch the account. And it kind of stuck. And now it's a running joke that we can use, which I think is fabulous. And it's just funny, like, because there aren't that many newspapers on TikTok. There aren't that many massive newspapers on TikTok. So it's just a cute little, like, we're a newspaper.
Gotcha.
That's why it's there.
All right, we in the final 30 seconds, let's see if we can summarize the top 5 takes from Carmella. Do short form vertical video. Do it. It's a great way to diversify the audience that you're reaching. Number 2, be authentic to yourself and to the platform you're on. Number 3, your storytelling. Your storytellers tell stories. Number 4, burner accounts are a good place to find music, remixes and sped up. Yes, we've found a way. Go audience. Watch for trigger words. Number 5, you may be getting your content suppressed. It's hard to tell. Don't trust anyone who tells you they can tell for sure, but watch out, because there are trigger words that might get your content suppressed. And I'll throw in a number 6 just for good measure, and that's teamwork makes the dream work, because I think it would be really difficult to do this job alone, but that you've really kind of cracked something interesting by working together, not just with the newspaper staff, but with 3 other people who you can say, like, okay, you take over the comment section now. So thank you, Carmella.
Thank you.
We're gonna end with one more. We're gonna end with my favorite, because it has to be done. Thank you, Carmella, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Oh my God.
It's the best.
This is factually and contractually how we walk around the office, by the way. Key to success, I think.
Love you guys.